Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be looking at a beta comparison of the route Silence that Stefano Ghisolfi has been trying lately. First, I just want to give a massive shout out to both Stefano and Adam and their teams because, well, I reached out to them and checked like, hey, could I use your footage to create a beta comparison? Since, you know, like we've seen a lot of footage of Stefano on the route, and there's of course the Silence movie that Ondra made a couple of years back, which by the way is my favorite one of all time. I mean, something that I've thought about a lot when watching the series that Stefano is making now is just how vastly different the way they climb the route is, and that's what we're gonna look through today because, you know, it's pretty rad. But yeah, just a massive shout out to all of them for allowing me to use this footage to create this video. If you haven't checked out their respective films, then make sure you do. I'll put everything in the description down below so you can check it out for yourself. Silence, as many of you know, is possibly the absolute hardest route in the entire world. I'll do a quick breakdown of it. It's an 8B route into a no-hands rest, into kind of a jug ladder, into a 7B boulder. After that, you have a, according to Stefano, not very good rest into a very hard boulder, graded around B15 or so. Followed by a double knee bar no-hands rest into a V12 boulder into a 7C plus boulder. Today we're going to break it down into parts and we're going to look at the different betas that Stefano Ghisolfi and Adam Ondra used and compare how these two climbers that have very different styles and very different strengths, do they have to use the same method? Do they have to use different methods? We're going to break it down. We're going to look at the differences. Let's go. The first part of the route, there's not actually that much footage to compare on because it's kind of described as an easy beginning with jugs on steep terrain. It's not presented so much in the Silence film. We get to see some glimpse of it and we can have a look at Stefano's beta for it. But I figured there's not so much of a comparison, so I kind of skipped this bit in total. What should be mentioned though is that this easy beginning is actually an 8B route followed by a no-hands full-on rest knee bar into a 7B boulder into another rest. So when they say easy, I mean, I kind of get it because, you know, when you're doing 9C, 8B has to feel very easy. But at the same time, it's insane that they fully recover from it in my perspective. Like, I'm not much of a sport climber, so I don't know how much you can properly rest on a knee bar. But regardless, like physical climbing, that type of pulling, that has to tire you out. But Stefano says that he gets 100% rest from the first knee bar, which, I mean, I believe him. He's very good at recovering, and if it is like a bomber knee bar, it just sticks in there. So, but anyways, the 7B boulder that follows, still kind of tiring, it looks like. It's kind of like a compression thing. What's interesting though is the first beta comparison that we can look at, which is the knee bar rest just before the first crux. So this first crux, as many of you know, is an 8C boulder problem, 8C/plus even, it sounds like, from Stefano. And what that means is like any form of fatigue will be really, really troublesome. And what's interesting is that Adam can get like a double, or he can at least get he gets his left knee in and just locks it in completely and just relaxes, and looks like he can get a full recovery from it. But Stefano seems to have a harder time, and he also mentions that in his video that he's not really able to fully recover from it. It's a bad knee bar in his words. And it looks like he's kind of just knee scumming it instead, which will be interesting when he starts working on doing the route, all of it, because it's like, that can be kind of crucial, being able to rest just that little bit of extra. Second comes the more interesting parts, because now we're in at the, you know, the first crux, the hardest section of the hardest route in the world. One of the hardest routes. Interestingly enough, this first section is where they differ the absolute most, I would say, on the entire route. The first few moves are similar. They both climb into a position where they can have a right hand in a bad pocket and the left hand in what appears to be a fairly good side pull. From this point, they have to get their feet above their head. But here's kind of the kicker, because what Adam does is he jams his left foot into the crack and Stefano goes with the right one. So what this means is they're put into very different positions for the upcoming sequence. Adam, as you can see, he cuts loose completely, hangs down, and then uses his shoulder and his lower body to create a large momentum, which then allows him to get the height for jamming in the left foot properly. He also goes like, tosses his right foot far into the right in order to be able to push with that lower portion of his body and create a bigger rotation. Stefano, on the other hand, basically does a static inverted front lever to get his feet up. This has to require like a tremendous amount of body tension. But what I'm thinking is that it could allow you to be more engaged on your arms throughout the movement. And so I personally believe that this is because of their very, very different climbing styles. Ondra is known for his dynamic approach to everything. And basically what happens when he cuts loose like that and just sinks down on his arms is that he relieves all this tension that's been built up throughout the movements and for these especially for these 3 bumps. And when he relieves that tension, he can recover it to push up his legs more, and using the momentum from your legs also helps with this, of course. Stefano, on the other hand, maintains the tension that's been building up through the movements, but apparently he can still push his legs up enough. And I do think it's just because Stefano is like a static monster and Ondra is a dynamic beast. So it's like very different styles that allows them to do these sequences. But it's very interesting to see that it's such a different approach for one of the, what appears to be like the cutoff move on the route, like the one move that probably dictates how the entire thing goes. Next, they both do the same move to get their bodies more aligned with the crack, and that's to bump the right hand into a sloper to stop the momentum, and then bump it into a mono to basically get engagement and compression from the foot and the fingers. But here is where they start to differ. Stefano goes up with his left toe to kind of get a toe hook and a right foot jam in at the same time, while as Ondra has his left toe continuously jammed. This left toe hook basically becomes the same rotational point that Adam is using with his left toe jam, but because Stefano also has his right foot jammed in the crack, it seems like he can kind of control his sideways motion a bit more, and therefore opts to leave the crack already after just 2 moves. Adam, on the other hand, goes straight up through the crack, rotating in ways that I believe humans weren't supposed to rotate to. Which, if I understood it correctly, is also the reason he brought in Klaus Isele to help him with his training, where he mentions that they worked on ways to increase the way his muscles can contract because they weren't really humanly possible before. Very interesting part of the Silence movie. Go watch it right away after if you haven't. Next up, once Stefano is out on the right side of the crack, he goes into, I guess what you could call more conventional climbing. He does some clock style movements to get his left foot as a toe hook on the side of the crack, which in turn allows him to reach back into the crack, kind of, or like the side of the crack that there is. And from there, he uses right heel hook to get into the top jug of this boulder problem. What's interesting next is the coming rest, because we do have one more big section of the route coming up, the second crux, where you kind of, it's Stefano said that it's around 8A plus, I think, and Ondra has said 8B in the past for this next section. I don't know what it is, but it's hard regardless, whichever grade it is. So you need to kind of fully recover after this 8C boulder problem. Stefano does a double knee bar that looks very, very promising, and like he can get a very good rest from it, while Ondra alternates between right and left leg. I don't know how much, but I know that he does, kind of. So it definitely creates a different outcome for how much they can rest. It's hard to tell how good one is versus the other. What's really interesting is that these two climbers have incredibly different heights, right? I think there's approximately 16 centimeters, maybe even more between them. And this next boulder problem is like a crunched up, kind of weird positioning thing. What's quite fascinating about it is that they climb it almost identically despite this height difference. There's a small hand swap that Adam uses to exit the boulder that Stefano eventually goes into as well. But the actual movement and the idea behind every move is basically the same as far as I can tell. Here's the kicker. There's a very obvious difference in speed between these two climbers that we're gonna take a quick look at, because I sped up the clip of Stefano doing this part by 2 times. And this is what it looks like compared to an Ondra does it. Obviously, Stefano hasn't tried the route as much as Ondra by now, and what we're looking at on Ondra's perspective is his send go, and he's probably being as efficient as possible. But there's a pretty interesting speed difference. Like, I wonder if Stefano will speed up all that more. He is a pretty slow climber. He has an ability to recover on very, very small holds that a lot of other climbers, that kind of what separates him quite a lot from a lot of other climbers, is his ability to hold on a tiny crimp and recover. While most people need like a knee bar or a slightly better hold or something else, he kind of, as long as he's in a good position, he's okay to recover, which also creates a slower climbing style because his arms doesn't get as fatigued. But yeah, kind of an interesting observation. We're gonna look at one more example later on. Anyways, the next section after the crux is, they get a little bit of a rest, doesn't look too good, but they have a 7C plus boulder problem coming up, according to Adam. This is also a very interesting part. I mean, I did say the V15 boulder problem was the biggest difference, but I might have to change that because this section is vastly different. It's called an easy section, I believe, by Stefano, and I find that quite interesting as they do climb in very different styles. I mean, granted, 7C plus is far below 8B and 8C, so you could still call it easy relative to those, but climbing a 7C plus after all of that, I think would be hard for basically everyone. So I wonder if Stefano might have a much more efficient approach here. He goes basically just on underclings and says that he can kind of rest halfway through the boulder problem, just before it ends, I guess. But it's quite interesting that they have such different approaches to this. I mean, they're literally complete opposites when they're climbing the section. Enough of that, we have one more section to look through, which is the end of the route. And again, this is quite hilarious to take notes in difference in. Here, I decided to speed down Adam's clip by 50%, since they have the basically exact same beta for this part also. And yeah, let's just have a look and enjoy that for a second. So that is the full breakdown of the beta on silence. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see more, then the subscribe button is somewhere around, so make sure you hit that. And obviously, if you haven't, you have to check out both the Silence movie and Stefano series on the route. As I mentioned, like when I must have watched Adam's video like 20 times by now throughout the years. I remember when it was released and I was like, wow, this is the coolest thing ever. And it was kind of a great inspiration to me in terms of filmmaking. And I think it's, yeah, like something to aspire towards is creating a film like that. So make sure you check that out as well. Aside from that, I guess I'll see you in the next video, folks. Peace out, my homies.